Thief! The word exploded across the opulent ballroom of the Palazzo Contarini like a gunshot, instantly freezing every conversation, every clink of champagne glasses, every whispered compliment about the evening's extravagant display of wealth. 300 of Europe's most distinguished guests turned in unison toward the source of the accusation, their jeweled necks craning like elegant swans sensing danger. At the center of the marble dance floor, beneath the glow of 1,000 crystal Murano chandelier, stood Serafina Blackwood in all her vindictive glory, her custom Elay Saab gown, encrusted with genuine diamonds that caught the light like captured. Starfire seemed to armor her against any hint of impropriety. The Blackwood family tiara, a priceless artifact that had crowned 3 generations of British socialites, sat upon her perfectly coiffed platinum hair like a weapon of war. Her manicured finger, adorned with a 15-carat engagement ring, pointed with theatrical precision at a young woman who stood near the palazzo's Renaissance frescoes. A leather portfolio clutched against her chest like a shield. "This woman," Serafina's voice carried with the trained projection of someone born to command attention. "This, nobody, has been systematically stealing from us, from me, from my family, from my fiancé." The accusation hung in the perfumed air like poison. Celeste Moreau felt the blood drain from her face as hundreds of pairs of eyes, some curious, some scandalized, others gleefully anticipatory, fixed upon her with the intensity of stage lights. Her simple black dress, elegant in its modesty, suddenly felt like a neon sign advertising her difference, her displacement in this world of impossible luxury. What? Celeste's voice emerged as barely a whisper, her French accent more pronounced under stress. "I don't understand." "Oh, don't you?" Serafina's laugh was crystalline and cruel, designed to shatter whatever composure remained in the room. She began to circle Celeste like a predator, her silk train sweeping the marble floor with imperial authority. "Don't pretend innocence now. We all saw you. The way you've been prowling through these halls for weeks, cataloging our treasures, memorizing our secrets, worming your way into my fiancé's confidences." From across the ballroom, Maximilian Sterling Rothschild felt his world tilt on its axis. The heir to a maritime empire worth $14 billion had been engaged in animated conversation with the Venetian cultural minister about Renaissance art preservation when his fiancé's voice cut through the evening like a blade. His steel-gray eyes found Celeste immediately, the young woman who had spent the past month transforming his understanding of beauty, not through her modest appearance, but through her passionate discourse on Tintoretto's brushwork and her infectious enthusiasm for artistic restoration. "Serafina, what are you doing?" His voice carried the authority of generations of men accustomed to commanding merchant fleets, but there was something else there, a note of protective fury that made several nearby guests exchange meaningful glances. "What I should have done weeks ago," Serafina replied without breaking her predatory circle around Celeste. "Exposing this little gold digger for what she truly is. Did you really think no one would notice, mademoiselle? The way you've been studying our art collection, taking detailed photographs, making extensive notes about pieces worth millions. The way you've been manipulating my fiancé with your sob stories about poverty and your pathetic dreams of artistic scholarship." The ballroom erupted in scandalized murmurs. The Contessa di Venezia clutched her pearls with practiced drama. The Russian oil heiress whispered urgently to her companion behind a jeweled fan. The British ambassador's wife raised her opera glasses as if watching a particularly riveting performance. Celeste felt the walls closing in around her. "I was hired to catalog the collection for insurance purposes," she said, her voice growing, stronger despite her trembling hands. "Everything I've done has been completely professional and authorized by my fiancé, yes," Serafina interrupted, her voice dripping with venom. "How convenient. How perfectly manipulative. Seduce the man, gain his trust, and suddenly you have access to centuries of accumulated wealth. Tell me, how much were you planning to steal? Or were you aiming higher? Perhaps you thought you could steal the man himself." The final accusation hit like a physical blow. Celeste's portfolio slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, sending her carefully documented research cascading across the marble floor, photographs of brushwork details, historical provenance notes, condition reports written in her precise handwriting. The papers scattered like autumn leaves, and with them, any semblance of dignity she had managed to maintain. "That's enough." Maximilian's voice cut through the chaos as he strode across the ballroom, his movements fluid despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. But even as he approached, Celeste could see the doubt flickering in his eyes, the questions that Serafina's accusations had planted like seeds of destruction. Serafina smiled triumphantly, sensing victory. "Is it enough, darling? Or shall we call security? Have her searched? I'm sure we'd find all sorts of interesting items in her possession." The suggestion sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. This was better than opera, more thrilling than any entertainment money could buy. The public destruction of someone who had dared to reach beyond her station. Celeste looked around the ballroom one final time, taking in the faces of people who had already condemned her without trial, who found entertainment in her humiliation, who would dine out on this story for months to come. Then her eyes found Maximilian's, and in them she saw the most devastating truth of all. Uncertainty, where once there had been warmth. Questions where once there had been trust. With the dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose, Celeste straightened her shoulders and walked toward the palazzo's grand entrance, leaving her scattered research behind like breadcrumbs marking the path back to a simpler, honest world, where she belonged. The cobblestones of Venice gleamed like black mirrors under the streetlights as Celeste stumbled through the narrow alleyways, her vision blurred by tears she refused to let fall. The distant sound of the palazzo's orchestra drifted across the canal, a haunting reminder of the world she had just been expelled from with such devastating finality. Her hands shook as she clutched her small evening purse, the only possession she had managed to retain from the wreckage of her professional reputation. She had made it 3 blocks from the Palazzo Contarini when the distinctive sound of expensive leather shoes echoing against stone made her pause. Someone was following her, and in Venice's labyrinthine streets there was nowhere to hide. "Mademoiselle Moreau." The voice belonged to an elegant woman in her 60s, impeccably dressed in midnight blue Chanel, with silver hair swept into a sophisticated chignon. Celeste recognized her immediately. Countess Isabella Aldrovandi, one of Venice's most influential art patrons and, according to whispered gossip, the only woman in Europe who could make Serafina Blackwood nervous. "Countess," Celeste managed, attempting a curtsy despite her emotional turmoil. I should return to my lodgings. The evening has been quite the performance," Isabella interrupted, her Italian accent lending musical quality to her words. "Though I suspect you were not the one performing." Her dark eyes, sharp with intelligence despite her age, studied Celeste with the same intensity she might use to authenticate a masterpiece. "Tell me, child, what did you actually steal?" The directness of the question caught Celeste off guard. "Nothing. I stole nothing. I would never." "Of course you didn't," Isabella said with dismissive certainty. Anyone with half a brain could see that Serafina's little theatrical display was motivated by something far more primitive than concern for missing artwork. She stepped closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "The question is, what has you so frightened that the Rothschild heir might prefer scholarly conversation to social climbing?" Celeste felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." Isabella laughed, a sound like silver bells in the night air. "My dear, I have been navigating the treacherous waters of European high society since before you were born. I know the difference between genuine indignation and jealous rage. That woman is terrified you've stolen something far more valuable than art, her fiancé's attention." The words hung in the cool night air between them. Celeste found herself studying the Countess's face, searching for mockery but finding only shrewd assessment. "Even if that were true," Celeste said carefully, "it hardly matters now. My reputation is destroyed. No one in Venice will hire me to authenticate so much as a postcard after tonight." "Perhaps," Isabella mused, "but reputation, like art, can be restored with the right techniques and sufficient patience." She withdrew an elegant card case from her purse, extracting a cream-colored business card with the Aldrovandi family crest, embossed in gold. "I have a proposition for you, my dear. A commission that might prove illuminating." Celeste accepted the card with trembling fingers. "I don't understand." "I own a private collection that requires discreet evaluation. Very discreet. The work would be conducted at my palazzo, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. The pay is generous, and the project would provide you with ironclad credentials that even Serafina Blackwood's poison cannot touch." Hope flickered in Celeste's chest like a candle in the wind. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Isabella's smile was enigmatic. "I know enough. I know you have spent the past month treating priceless artworks with the reverence they deserve rather than the casual ownership displayed by most collectors. I know you speak 4 languages and have published papers on Renaissance restoration techniques that impressed even the Vatican's chief conservator. Most importantly, I know that young woman back there is so threatened by your presence that she was willing to risk public scandal to be rid of you." The Countess began to walk, and Celeste found herself falling into step beside her, drawn by curiosity despite her emotional exhaustion. "There is something else you should know," Isabella continued as they crossed a small bridge over a moonlit canal. "The Sterling Rothschild engagement was arranged by families, not hearts. Maximilian's father needed the Blackwood shipping routes to complete his Mediterranean empire. Serafina's family needed the Sterling Rothschild fortune to maintain their lifestyle. It is a business transaction dressed in romantic clothing." "That doesn't excuse what happened tonight," Celeste said quietly. "No, but it explains it. A woman secure in her fiancé's affection would never have resorted to such desperate measures." Isabella paused at the center of the bridge, her hands resting on the ancient stone railing. "Tell me, during your time at the palazzo, did Maximilian ever seem like a man in love?" The question forced Celeste to confront memories she had been trying to suppress. Long conversations about art history that stretched into evening hours. The way his eyes lit up when she explained the significance of a particular brushstroke. His laughter echoing through the palazzo's halls when she shared stories of her struggles as a scholarship student. The moment 3 days ago when their hands had touched while examining a canaletto, and the electricity that had passed between them like recognition. "I shouldn't discuss such things," she whispered. "Of course not," Isabella agreed. "But consider this. A man truly committed to his engagement would not spend hours in deep conversation with a beautiful art historian, nor would he look at her, the way I observed him looking at you during the gallery tour last week." Celeste's breath caught. "You were there?" "I attend most cultural events in Venice, my dear. It pays to keep informed about who is appreciating art for its own sake versus who is merely performing appreciation." Isabella's expression grew serious. "Which brings me back to my proposition. Accept my commission, restore your professional standing, and perhaps discover some truths that certain people would prefer to keep hidden." The mysterious offer hung in the night air like a challenge. Celeste looked at the elegant card in her hand, then at the Countess's knowing smile. "What kind of truths?" she asked. Isabella's eyes twinkled with mischief. "The kind that make young billionaires question whether they're marrying for duty or desire, and the kind that prove authenticity, whether in art or in matters of the heart, is far more valuable than any price tag." The Palazzo Aldrovandi rose from the Grand Canal like a monument to centuries of refined taste and accumulated secrets. Unlike the ostentatious display of wealth that characterized most Venetian palazzos, Isabella's ancestral home whispered, rather than shouted, its importance. The morning light filtered through ancient windows, casting geometric patterns across marble floors that had been polished by 500 years of careful stewardship. Celeste followed the Countess through corridors lined with masterpieces that would make museum curators weep with envy. Her trained eye cataloged treasures as they passed. A genuine Botticelli sketch, a small but perfect Vermeer, a collection of Byzantine icons that belonged in the Louvre. Yet Isabella moved past these priceless works as if they were mere wallpaper, leading Celeste deeper into the palazzo's heart. "The commission I mentioned," Isabella said as they paused before an unremarkable wooden door, requires absolute discretion. What you are about to see has been hidden from the world for over 60 years. She withdrew an ornate key from her jacket pocket, its bronze surface worn smooth by decades of use. During World War II, my grandfather helped evacuate artworks from private collections threatened by Nazi looting. Some pieces were returned to their rightful owners after the war. Others remained in our care. The door opened to reveal a hidden gallery that took Celeste's breath away. Climate-controlled and perfectly lit, the secret room contained dozens of paintings, sculptures, and artifacts arranged with museum-quality precision. But these weren't just any artworks. They were pieces that had been presumed lost to history, destroyed in the chaos of war or stolen by conquering armies. "My God," Celeste whispered, her voice barely audible in the hushed space. Some of these are listed in the International Art Loss Register. The world believes they were destroyed." Isabella's expression grew solemn. "My family has been their guardians, protecting them from those who would exploit their monetary value rather than preserve their cultural significance. But I am the last of my line, and I will not take these secrets to my grave. The world deserves to know these treasures survived." Celeste moved through the gallery like a woman in a dream, her professional training warring with her emotional awe. She paused before a painting that made her heart skip. A Caravaggio that art historians had mourned as lost for decades, its dramatic chiaroscuro technique perfectly preserved despite its tumultuous journey through history. "You want me to authenticate and document everything," she said, understanding dawning in her voice. "More than that," Isabella replied. "I want you to prepare a comprehensive catalog for donation to major museums worldwide. Each piece will be returned to its country of origin, or, where that is impossible, donated to institutions that will ensure public access. It will be the most significant art recovery in modern history." The magnitude of the project was staggering. Celeste felt herself trembling with the weight of the responsibility. "This will take months. The research alone will require you to remain in Venice for the foreseeable future," Isabella finished with a knowing smile. "Far from the poisonous atmosphere Serafina Blackwood has created, but close enough to observe how certain people react to your continued presence in their world." As if summoned by the mention of her name, the sound of raised voices echoed from the palazzo's main entrance. Isabella's expression grew predatory as she recognized the masculine timbre of an agitated billionaire. "Countess Aldrovandi." Maximilian's voice carried through the corridors with the authority of a man accustomed to having doors opened and questions answered. "I know she's here. I saw her enter with you last night." Isabella's smile was feline. "Right on schedule. Shall we see what our young prince has to say for himself?" They found Maximilian in the palazzo's main salon, his usual composed demeanor shattered by obvious distress. His perfectly tailored suit was wrinkled, his dark hair disheveled as if he had run his hands through it repeatedly. The sophisticated mask he wore in public had cracked, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "Maximilian," Isabella greeted him with cool formality. "How unexpected. I trust your engagement party concluded successfully after your guest's dramatic departure?" His steel-gray eyes found Celeste immediately, and she saw relief flood his features before being replaced by something more complex: guilt, longing, and an emotion she didn't dare name. "Celeste, thank God. I've been searching for you all night." He took a step toward her, then stopped, perhaps remembering the circumstances of their last encounter. "I need to explain. What Serafina said, what she accused you of, was perfectly clear," Celeste interrupted, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite her racing heart. "I was presumptuous to think I could belong in your world, even temporarily." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Frustration crept into his voice. Serafina was jealous. She said those things because she knew. He stopped abruptly, glancing at Isabella's interested expression. "Because she knew what, darling?" Isabella prompted with theatrical innocence. Maximilian's jaw tightened. "Because she knew I had been distracted." By our conversations about art, by... He looked directly at Celeste, and she felt the full force of his attention like a physical touch. By you. The admission hung in the perfumed air of the salon like a confession. Celeste felt her carefully constructed defenses begin to crumble. You're engaged, she said quietly. To a woman who believes I'm a thief and a seductress. Even if you don't share her opinions, the fact remains that I don't belong in your world. What if I told you I was beginning to question whether I belong in it either? The words escaped him before he could stop them, revealing a vulnerability that transformed his aristocratic features into something achingly human. Isabella cleared her throat delicately. How fascinating. But I'm afraid Mademoiselle Moreau has accepted a commission from me that will require her full attention for the next several months. She won't have time for social complications. Maximilian's expression shifted to something approaching panic. What kind of commission? The confidential kind, Isabella replied smoothly. The kind that will establish her reputation as one of Europe's premier art authentication experts. The kind that will make last night's unpleasantness seem like the petty jealousy it was. Understanding dawned in Maximilian's eyes. You're protecting her. I'm giving her the opportunity to protect herself, Isabella corrected. Through work that will speak louder than any defense against false accusations. Celeste watched this exchange with growing amazement. These two people, both accustomed to wielding power and influence, were negotiating her future as if she were a precious artwork to be preserved and protected. I accept the commission, she said firmly, addressing Isabella but keeping her eyes on Maximilian. And I think it's best if we maintain professional boundaries until this project is complete. The words hit Maximilian like a physical blow. She saw him struggle with the dismissal, saw the moment he chose to accept it with the dignity of a man who had been born to lose gracefully. Of course, he said quietly. I hope you find the work fulfilling. As he turned to leave, Celeste felt something inside her chest twist painfully, but she had learned in the space of one devastating evening that some cages were gilded with gold, and others with the promise of love that could never be freely given. 3 weeks into her residency at the Palazzo Aldrovandi, Celeste had fallen into a rhythm that felt like a carefully choreographed dance between past and present. Each morning brought new revelations as she methodically cataloged treasures that had been hidden from the world for decades. Her days were filled with the quiet satisfaction of scholarly work, the thrill of discovery, and the growing certainty that she was participating in something that would reshape art history. She had almost convinced herself that she was content with this new life when the morning's post arrived with an unexpected disruption. Mademoiselle, Isabella's elderly butler, Giorgio, approached her workspace with the formality of a man who had served nobility for 50 years. There is a gentleman requesting an audience. He says it concerns the Venetian Cultural Heritage Committee. Celeste looked up from the Monet water lily painting she had been examining, a piece that should have been hanging in the Musée de l'Orangerie, but had instead spent 7 decades hidden in a Venetian palazzo. I'm not expecting anyone from the committee. Nevertheless, he is quite insistent. He mentioned something about authentication protocols and international cooperation. The phrase sent a chill down Celeste's spine. In the art world, international cooperation often meant investigations, legal challenges, and the kind of bureaucratic nightmares that could destroy careers. She set down her magnifying glass and followed Giorgio to the main salon, steeling herself for whatever fresh catastrophe awaited. The man waiting in the salon was not what she had expected. Tall and elegant, with silver hair and intelligent blue eyes, he possessed the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of dealing with priceless objects and impossible people. His suit was impeccable, his smile warm but professional. Dr. Moreau, he said, rising to greet her with a slight bow. Professor Heinrich Zimmermann, Director of the International Art Recovery Foundation. I believe we have much to discuss. The name hit her like a thunderbolt. Professor Zimmermann was a legend in the art world, the man who had spent his career tracking down stolen masterpieces and returning them to their rightful owners. His work had exposed Nazi art theft networks, corrupt dealers, and museum scandals that had rocked the international community. "Professor," she managed, accepting his offered handshake. "This is unexpected. How did you know about the Aldrovandi collection?" "My dear, when someone begins discreetly researching the provenance of 43 paintings that have been missing for over 60 years, word travels quickly in our small community." His smile was knowing but not unkind, particularly when that someone has recently survived a very public attempt at character assassination. Heat flooded Celeste's cheeks. "You heard about the engagement party." "I heard about a young woman being falsely accused of theft by someone who felt threatened by her professional competence. I also heard about a remarkable collection of rescued artworks that are about to be returned to the world." He paused, studying her face with the same intensity she had seen him use when examining disputed attributions. "What I didn't hear was why you haven't contacted my foundation for assistance with such a monumentally important project." The question caught her off guard. The Countess asked for discretion. I assumed she had her reasons for wanting to handle this privately." "Oh, she did. She does." Professor Zimmerman's expression grew almost paternal. "Isabella Aldrovandi contacted me 3 days ago. She wanted to ensure that when you were ready to take this project to the international stage, you would have the full support and credibility of the most respected art recovery organization in the world." Celeste felt her legs weaken. She sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the implications. What? "She is orchestrating your professional rehabilitation with the precision of a master chess player. This project will not only restore your reputation, it will establish you as one of the most important art historians of your generation." He sat across from her, his manner growing more serious. "But there is something else. Something I think you should know before you become too deeply involved." The change in his tone made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "What kind of something?" "The kind that involves your former employer and his charming fiancée." Professor Zimmerman opened his leather briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "I've been investigating the Sterling Rothschild collection for some time. There have been irregularities in their recent acquisitions." Celeste's breath caught. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that suggests someone has been purchasing artworks without proper provenance documentation. Pieces that may have been stolen, forged, or illegally exported." His expression grew grim. "The kind that could destroy reputations, end careers, and potentially involve criminal charges." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You think Maximilian is involved in art fraud?" "I think Maximilian Sterling Rothschild is a wealthy young man who trusts the wrong people. But his fiancée?" Professor Zimmerman opened the folder and spread several photographs across the coffee table. "Serafina Blackwood has been very active in the private art market. Very active and very careless about documentation." The photographs showed Serafina at various gallery openings and private sales. Always elegant, always charming, always in the company of dealers whose reputations were, according to the professor's notes, questionable at best. "She's been systematically acquiring pieces for the Sterling Rothschild collection," he continued. "Expensive pieces with convenient gaps in their ownership history. The kind of gaps that suggest wartime theft or illegal excavation." Celeste stared at the photographs, her mind racing. Does Maximilian know? That's what we need to determine. If he's complicit, he's facing serious legal consequences. If he's being manipulated... Professor Zimmerman's expression softened. Then he's about to discover that the woman he's planning to marry has been using his name and fortune to build a collection of stolen art. The implications were staggering. Celeste thought of the man who had spent hours discussing the ethical responsibilities of collectors, who had spoken passionately about the importance of preserving cultural heritage for future generations. Could he really be involved in the very crimes he seemed to despise? "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because you're uniquely positioned to help us discover the truth. You've worked with the collection. You understand the pieces and their supposed provenance. Most importantly, you have access to both the Sterling Rothschild world and the Aldrovandi resources." He leaned forward, his expression intense. We need someone on the inside, someone who can verify our suspicions without alerting the wrong people. You want me to spy on them? I want you to help us determine whether a young man is about to throw his life away for a woman who has been systematically destroying everything he claims to value. Professor Zimmerman's voice carried the weight of decades spent fighting art crime, and I want you to help us recover stolen artworks before they disappear forever into private collections. Celeste felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She thought of Maximilian's desperate search for her 3 weeks ago, of the vulnerability in his eyes when he had admitted questioning his place in his own world. She thought of Serafina's cruel accusations and triumphant smile. Most of all, she thought of the dozens of masterpieces hidden in Isabella's secret gallery, finally ready to return to the world after decades of exile. If I do this, she said slowly, and if we discover that Maximilian is innocent, what happens to his engagement? Professor Zimmerman's smile was enigmatic. That, my dear, would be entirely up to him. The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper embossed with the sterling Rothschild family crest, delivered by private courier to the Palazzo Aldrovandi, with the kind of ceremonial precision reserved for matters of utmost importance. Isabella examined it with the predatory satisfaction of a chess master, watching her opponent walk into a carefully laid trap. The Sterling Rothschild Foundation cordially invites distinguished members of the international art community to an exclusive preview of our newly acquired Renaissance collection, she read aloud, her voice dripping with amusement. How perfectly convenient. It seems our young billionaire is eager to show off his fiancée's latest acquisitions. Celeste studied the elegant invitation with growing unease. 2 days had passed since Professor Zimmerman's revelation about Serafina's questionable art dealings, and she had spent every hour wrestling with the implications. Now, fate seemed to be forcing her hand. I can't attend this, she said, setting the invitation aside with deliberate care. After what happened at the engagement party, my presence would be essential, Isabella interrupted smoothly. Professor Zimmerman needs someone with intimate knowledge of authentication techniques to examine these pieces in person. Someone who can identify forgeries, stolen works, or pieces with fabricated provenance. Someone who would be recognized and probably thrown out before making it past the entrance hall, Celeste countered. Isabella's smile was mysterious. Not if she arrived as my guest, representing the Aldrovandi Foundation's new partnership with the International Art Recovery Foundation. Not if she came armed with credentials that would make even Serafina Blackwood think twice about causing a scene. The plan, as Isabella outlined it, was audacious in its simplicity. Celeste would attend the preview as the newly appointed liaison between two of Europe's most respected art institutions. Her presence would be not only legitimate, but essential. The kind of professional courtesy that even Serafina couldn't openly challenge without appearing petty and unprofessional. But what if Maximilian, Celeste began, then stopped, unwilling to voice her fears about seeing him again. What if he still looks at you the way a man looks at something he's lost? Isabella's expression grew knowing. My dear, that's rather the point. A man who is genuinely committed to his engagement doesn't spend 3 weeks making discreet inquiries about a woman's whereabouts. He doesn't send his personal assistant to question gallery owners about her professional status, and he certainly doesn't purchase first-edition books on Renaissance art restoration and have them delivered anonymously to palazzos, where she might be staying. Celeste felt her breath catch. He did what? The complete works of Bernard Berenson arrived yesterday morning. Exquisite condition, probably worth more than most people's annual salary. No card, but the sterling Rothschild bookplate was rather telling. Isabella's expression grew serious. The question is, are you prepared to discover whether his interest in you is genuine, or whether you're simply another piece in whatever game Serafina is playing? 3 hours later, Celeste stood before the full-length mirror in Isabella's private suite, barely recognizing herself. The midnight blue gown was a masterpiece of subtle elegance. Armani, perfectly tailored to emphasize her natural grace while maintaining the sophisticated restraint appropriate for a professional art expert. Isabella's personal stylist had transformed her usually simple hairstyle into an elegant chignon, secured with what appeared to be genuine sapphire pins. "Remember," Isabella said, fastening a strand of pearls around Celeste's neck. Pearls that had once belonged to a Medici princess. "You are not the trembling girl who fled from that ballroom 3 weeks ago. You are Dr. Celeste Moreau, internationally recognized expert in Renaissance art authentication, representing institutions that predate most of these people's family fortunes. Let them remember who was conquered and who was conqueror when their ancestors were still learning to eat with forks." The transformation was more than cosmetic. As Celeste studied her reflection, she felt something shift inside her, a confidence born not from external validation, but from the recognition of her own professional worth. She was not an interloper in this world. She was an expert whose knowledge was essential to its functioning. The Sterling Rothschild mansion occupied an entire block of Venice's most exclusive district, its neoclassical facade lit by hundreds of carefully positioned lights that turned the building into a beacon of wealth and power. Luxury automobiles lined the street, and elegantly dressed guests moved through the entrance with the practiced ease of people accustomed to such displays. Celeste arrived in Isabella's private water taxi, the Aldrovandi family gondolier resplendent in traditional livery as he guided them to the mansion's private dock. The symbolic message was clear. She was under the protection of one of Venice's oldest and most respected families. The mansion's interior had been transformed into a gallery space with newly acquired artworks displayed against walls lined with museum-quality lighting. Celeste's trained eye immediately began cataloging the pieces, and what she saw made her stomach tighten with professional alarm. A Botticelli angel that she was certain had been reported stolen from a private collection in Florence 5 years ago. A Byzantine icon whose provenance documentation would be impossible to verify. A small Raphael sketch that looked authentic, but bore none of the characteristic aging patterns she would expect from a genuine Renaissance drawing. "Magnificent, isn't it?" The voice belonged to Serafina, who had appeared beside her with the silent grace of a predator. Her emerald Valentino gown was cut to perfection, her jewelry chosen to broadcast both wealth and taste. But there was something different about her, an edge of nervous energy that hadn't been present at the engagement party. "Quite impressive," Celeste replied, her voice carefully neutral. "The Botticelli in particular catches the eye. One of my personal favorites. The provenance is absolutely fascinating. It's been in a private Swiss collection for decades. Quite a coup to acquire it for public display." Serafina's smile was sharp as a blade. "I'm surprised to see you here, Dr. Moreau. I thought after your departure from Venice, you might have decided to pursue opportunities elsewhere." "Art history waits for no one's personal drama," Celeste said smoothly. "The Aldrovandi Foundation's partnership with the International Art Recovery Foundation requires my continued presence in Venice." She saw the flicker of alarm in Serafina's eyes at the mention of the Recovery Foundation, a reaction that confirmed Professor Zimmermann's suspicions. "How scholarly of you," Serafina managed. "I do hope you find our collection meets your professional standards." "I'm sure it will be thoroughly educational," Celeste replied. Before Serafina could respond, a familiar voice cut through the ambient conversation like a knife through silk. "Celeste." She turned to find Maximilian approaching, and the sight of him sent her carefully constructed composure into freefall. He looked magnificent in his black evening wear, but there was something different about him. A tension in his shoulders, a wariness in his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. "Max," Serafina said quickly, possessively taking his arm. "I was just telling Dr. Moreau about the Swiss provenance of the Botticelli." But Maximilian's attention was entirely focused on Celeste, his gaze traveling from her face to her elegant gown with an intensity that made her feel exposed despite her sophisticated armor. "You look," he began, then stopped, apparently remembering his fiancée's presence. "You look well, professional. The partnership with the Recovery Foundation sounds fascinating." It is, she said, meeting his gaze directly. We're working on several cases involving artwork with questionable authentication. It's amazing what careful investigation can reveal about pieces that seemed perfectly legitimate on the surface. The words carried multiple meanings, and she saw understanding flicker in his eyes. He knew she wasn't just talking about art. Yes, he said slowly. I imagine some collections might not survive such scrutiny. Serafina's grip on his arm tightened almost imperceptibly. Darling, surely you're not suggesting that any of our pieces— Of course not, he said, but his eyes never left Celeste's face. Though I suppose that's the beauty of expert authentication. It either confirms what we hoped was true, or reveals truths we weren't prepared to face. The charged moment was interrupted by the arrival of other guests demanding attention, but as Serafina led Maximilian away, Celeste caught something in his backward glance that made her pulse quicken. It was the look of a man who had just realized he was drowning and had spotted a lifeline. The evening was far from over, and already she could feel the careful facades beginning to crack. The confrontation began with a whisper and ended with the sound of shattering crystal echoing through the Sterling Rothschild mansion, like the breaking of a spell that had held everyone captive for far too long. It was Professor Zimmerman who fired the first shot, arriving precisely 1 hour into the evening's festivities with the timing of a man who understood the dramatic value of patience. He entered flanked by 2 officials from the Italian Art Heritage Authority and a representative from Interpol's Art Crime Division, their badges discreetly displayed but unmistakably authoritative. Professor, Celeste greeted him with carefully modulated surprise, playing her role to perfection. I wasn't expecting to see you here this evening. Dr. Moreau, how fortuitous, he replied, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet gallery. I was hoping to discuss some irregularities we've discovered in several pieces currently on display. Perhaps you could assist with the authentication process? The words fell into the elegant, gathering like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of confusion and alarm that spread outward from their epicenter. Celeste watched Serafina's face drain of color while maintaining her own expression of professional interest. Certainly, she said, withdrawing a professional portfolio from her evening bag, a detail Isabella had insisted upon. Which pieces were you hoping to examine? What followed was a masterclass in public destruction conducted with surgical precision. Professor Zimmerman approached the Botticelli angel first, producing a tablet containing high-resolution photographs and detailed documentation. This piece was reported stolen from the Palazzo Benedetti in Florence in 2019, he announced to the gathering crowd. The theft was never solved, and the Italian authorities have been searching for it ever since. Dr. Moreau, would you confirm the identifying characteristics? Celeste examined the painting with professional thoroughness, pointing out specific details that matched the stolen work exactly. Her voice remained steady and clinical, but she could feel the electric tension building in the room as the implications became clear. The brushwork pattern in the lower right corner, she said, indicating a barely visible signature technique. The specific ultramarine pigmentation, the minor restoration work along the frame edge that was documented before the theft. This is unquestionably the missing Palazzo Benedetti piece. Murmurs erupted throughout the gallery. Several guests began photographing the scene with their phones, while others moved toward the exits with the instinctive self-preservation of people who recognized a scandal in the making. There must be some mistake. Serafina's voice cut through the chaos, pitched higher than usual but still maintaining its aristocratic authority. The provenance documentation is absolutely authentic. We purchased this piece from a respected Swiss dealer with impeccable credentials. Professor Zimmerman's smile was pitying. Herr Müller of Geneva? Yes, we've been investigating his operations for some time. He specializes in creating false provenance for stolen artworks. He's currently awaiting trial in Switzerland for art fraud. The revelation hit Serafina like a physical blow. Celeste watched her struggle to maintain composure while her entire world crumbled around her. But the performance was far from over. The Byzantine icon, Professor Zimmerman continued, moving to the next piece, was illegally excavated from a site in Syria and smuggled out during the Civil War. The Raphael sketch is a masterful forgery, beautiful work, but created no earlier than 1987 based on the canvas preparation techniques. With each revelation, Maximilian's expression grew more devastated. He stood frozen in the center of the gallery, watching his collection and his fiancée's credibility disintegrate before his eyes. "Max?" Serafina said desperately, reaching for his arm. "You have to understand, I was protecting the collection. These pieces would have been lost forever if we hadn't preserved them. Sometimes the greater good requires what?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of thunder. "Requires stealing? Requires building our entire cultural legacy on lies and theft? I did it for us," she pleaded. "For our future, for the foundation. You don't understand how difficult it is to acquire truly significant pieces through legitimate channels. Everyone else does it this way. Everyone else doesn't claim to be preserving cultural heritage while destroying it." The words came out flat, emotionless, as if he were reading from a script. "How many pieces, Serafina? How much of our collection is stolen or forged?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Celeste felt her heart break for him as she watched a man confront the complete destruction of everything he thought he believed in. The Swiss bank records show payments totaling 47 million euros over the past 18 months, Professor Zimmerman said quietly. "All to dealers now under investigation for art trafficking. I'm afraid, Mr. Sterling Rothschild, that your collection will need to be seized as evidence while we sort out which pieces can be returned to their rightful owners." "No." Serafina's composure finally shattered completely. "No, you don't understand. I can explain everything. The documentation is legitimate. The dealers came highly recommended. Celeste," she whirled toward her with wild eyes. "This is your doing, isn't it? You couldn't stand that I exposed you for what you are, so you've orchestrated this entire—" "Enough." Maximilian's voice cut through her hysteria like a blade. "Celeste has nothing to do with this. She was investigating art recovery, doing the work I should have been doing all along instead of blindly trusting someone who was systematically destroying everything I claimed to value." He looked at Celeste then, and she saw in his eyes not just devastation but a terrible clarity, as if he were seeing her and himself for the first time. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "for not defending you 3 weeks ago, for allowing my own cowardice and confusion to let you be humiliated, for being too blind to see what was happening in my own collection, my own life." "Max," Celeste said softly, stepping toward him. "You couldn't have known—" "I should have known. I should have questioned the convenient provenance, the too-good-to-be-true acquisitions. I should have trusted my instincts about you instead of my obligations to her." He glanced at Serafina with something approaching pity. "I've been living in a cage built of other people's expectations, other people's definitions of what my life should be. It took losing everything to realize that the only authentic thing in my world was the woman I was too afraid to fight for." The confession hung in the air between them, witnessed by a gallery full of strangers and surrounded by stolen masterpieces. But somehow it felt more real than any declaration made in comfort and security. "The engagement is over," he said to Serafina, his voice gentle but implacable. "I'll ensure you have legal representation, but I won't be part of covering up what you've done." As the authorities began the process of cataloging evidence and Serafina was led away in elegant handcuffs that somehow seemed fitting for a crime committed in couture, Maximilian found himself alone with Celeste in the ruins of his former life. "I don't suppose," he said with a rueful smile that transformed his aristocratic features into something achingly vulnerable, "that a disgraced billionaire with a destroyed reputation and a seized art collection would be worthy of a brilliant art historian's attention?" Celeste looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the heir to a shipping fortune or the owner of a Venetian palazzo, but a man who had chosen truth over comfort, authenticity over convenience, love over obligation. "That depends," she said, stepping closer to him with a smile that felt like sunrise after the longest night. "Does this disgraced billionaire understand that a relationship built on genuine respect and shared values is worth more than all the stolen masterpieces in the world? His answer was a kiss that tasted like freedom and felt like coming home to a place she had never been but had always been searching for. Around them, the carefully constructed world of artificial perfection crumbled away, leaving only the unshakable foundation of two people who had chosen each other not despite their flaws, but because of their courage to be authentic in a world that rewarded beautiful lies. 6 months later, the Palazzo Aldrovandi hosted an exhibition that made international headlines. Recovered and Restored: The Hidden Treasures of World War II. Dr. Celeste Moreau, now Director of International Art Recovery, stood beside her. Husband, former billionaire, current maritime shipping manager and full-time supporter of art repatriation efforts, as they watched thousands of visitors experience masterpieces that had been lost for decades. In the end, they discovered that the most valuable things in life couldn't be stolen, forged, or purchased. They could only be earned through the courage to be authentically, imperfectly, beautifully human.